Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking on a mission that is, well, it's pretty intense. We're diving into the dark side of pharmacology. We're talking about what happens when medications, drugs we use all the time, trigger this catastrophic immune response where the body's largest organ, the skin, just starts to destroy itself.
That's a perfect way to frame it. We're unraveling the mechanics of drug-induced hypersensitivity reactions, specifically the most alarming end of the spectrum.
The scars, right.
Exactly. Severe cutaneous adverse reactions.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, we really need to get to grips with Stevens-Johnson syndrome, SJS, and its twin, toxic epidermal necrolysis, or 10N.
So you've got this whole spectrum of disaster. It starts with maybe just a simple rash, but it can go all the way up to complete skin detachment. Is there one thing that ties all these different reactions together?
Yes, fundamentally, they are all idiosyncratic.
Meaning they don't happen to everyone.
Right. And mechanistically, they're all T-cell mediated. They're what we call a delayed or type 4A hypersensitivity reaction. The immune system is the attacker, but it takes time, sometimes days or even weeks, for that response to build up to a critical level.
Okay. And when we look at SJS versus 10, how do you tell them apart? Is it just academic, or does it actually change what you do in the emergency room?
Oh, it absolutely defines the level of emergency. The distinction is all about the percentage of body surface area, the BSA, that's lost its skin.
So skin loss.
Yeah, epidermal detachment. For SJS, you're looking at less than 10% detachment. But once you cross that 30% threshold, you're in 10 territory.
And the space in between.
That's the SJS-10 overlap. But 10 is a total failure of the skin as a barrier. It is absolutely life-threatening.
That makes the stakes incredibly high. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission is to understand the molecular gears behind this self-destruction, how T cells get activated, identify the big drug culprits, and then review the cutting-edge management, especially why a drug like cyclosporine is becoming so important.
We really have to start with the trigger. How does one tiny drug molecule convince a T cell that it's an enemy worth, killing over?
Exactly. So a drug is in your blood. It's just this small foreign chemical. How does it become an antigen, a target for a T cell? I know there's the classic way, and then this newer, kind of scarier concept.
So let's start with the classic one, the hapten model. A hapten is basically a molecule that's too small to be seen by the immune system on its own. It's invisible.
Okay.
So the drug, or one of its metabolites, it binds to a much larger protein in the body, and that creates a hapten protein complex. Now it's big enough to be seen.
So it becomes a target.
Exactly. An antigen-presenting cell, or an APC, gobbles it up, processes it, and then presents a piece of it to a naive T cell, and that kicks off the whole cascade proliferation cytokine release.
Yeah.
That's what drives your typical, run-of-the-mill drug rash.
But here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because that model, it feels a little too slow for the kind of destruction you see in SJS-10. And this is where the PI concept comes in.
That's right. The PI concept, pharmacologic interaction of drugs with immune receptors. It suggests a fundamental shortcut that makes these reactions so dangerous. The drug molecule itself can directly bind to and activate the T-cell receptor.
Without the APC.
Without needing that APC courier to process and present it.
Wait, if it bypasses the antigen-presenting cells, which are kind of the immune system's quality control, does that mean the reaction is just faster, more intense?
Precisely. It's a direct activation.
Right.
It is a massive cellular false alarm that just skips several safety checkpoints.
Yeah.
And this direct binding helps explain why it's so specific and why it's linked so strongly to genetics, which we'll get to.
So once those T cells, the CD8 plus cytotoxic T cells are activated, how do they become these demolition crews that cause the skin cells, the keratinocytes, to just self-destruct.
It's a cytotoxic mechanism.
Yeah.
The T cells flood into the epidermis, and they execute the skin cells through a few key pathways. First, they release things like perforin and granzyme B.
Which do what, exactly?
They essentially drill holes into the keratinocytes and inject cell-killing enzymes.
And there's another player, right? One that doesn't even need to make direct contact.
That's granulosin. It's secreted by both the T cells and natural killer cells. You can think of it as an area of effect weapon. Granulosin is a small but potent molecule that causes keratinocyte death without direct cell-to-cell contact. It creates widespread damage.
But the real catastrophe, the thing that causes sheets of skin to peel off, that's the apoptosis pathway, right? Programmed cell death.
Absolutely. That is the Fas ligand pathway. The Fas ligand, or FASL, binds to its receptor, Fas, which is on the surface of all these keratinocytes. And once that happens, the keratinocyte gets a signal to initiate massive apoptosis, cellular suicide.
And clinically, this is actually useful. We can measure this.
Yes. Studies show that serum FASL concentrations are way up in SJS-10 patients.
If that marker is elevated, what does that let us do? I mean, does detecting it early really change the outcome?
It could change the entire timeline for intervention. The data suggests we can detect this rise in FASL up to 4 days before you even see the severe signs, like mucosal damage.
4 days. That's a huge head start.
It's a precious window. It means you can stop the drug, get the patient to specialized care, and start immunomodulatory treatments, all of which we know reduces mortality.
That is a massive insight. Okay, moving from the microscopic ward to the macroscopic culprits. Let's talk about who the medication's most likely to start this whole chain reaction.
Yeah, when you look at the data, a few drug classes just keep showing up at the top of the high-risk list for SJS-10.
Like what?
The big ones are sulfonamide drugs, the aromatic anticonvulsants, so things like phenytoin, carbamazepine, lamotrigine allopurinol, some beta-lactam antibiotics, certain NSAIDs, and the antiretroviral abacavir.
It's amazing that such common drugs can cause these reactions. And as you said, it's idiosyncratic, so it's not random, it's genetic. How does your immune fingerprint, your HLA type, predict if you'll react to something as simple as allopurinol?
It's a really powerful example of personalized medicine. So the HLA system, the human leukocyte antigen system, it's like the immune system's ID badge factory. It makes proteins that show peptides to T cells, telling them what's self and what's foreign.
Okay.
If you have a specific, let's say, faulty HLA allele, your immune system is basically pre-wired to see that drug molecule as an immediate threat. It triggers that PI concept we just talked about.
Can you give us a concrete example of one of these genetic tripwires?
For sure. The strongest link we know of is with the gout medication, allopurinol. If a patient has the HLA-B58.01 allele, their risk is so high that just having that allele is a contraindication. You just don't use the drug.
Wow, that's a direct clinical mandate from your genes.
It's a life-saving one. And there are others. For anticonvulsants like carbamazepine, the risk is tied to HLA-A3101, especially in Northern European and Japanese populations. For the antiretroviral abacavir, it's HLA-B57.01.
You also mentioned metabolic issues, like being a slow acetylator with sulfur drugs. What does that mean for someone taking, say, Bactrim?
Right, so that's about how your liver detoxifies the drug. Acetylation is a key process for making drugs safer and easier to excrete. If you have a slow acetylator genotype, your body does this detoxification very slowly.
So the bad stuff hangs around longer.
Exactly. The toxic reactive metabolites of the sulfonamide buildup, that leads to more oxidative stress and a much higher chance that one of those metabolites will trigger that immune response. A slow detox pathway just gives the immune system more opportunity to attack.
Okay, so we have the mechanism, the culprits. What about timing? Is this an instant reaction or a delayed fuse?
Definitely delayed fuse. It's a type 5 reaction, remember. SJS and 10 typically show up 1 to 3 weeks after you start the drug. But we have to mention DRESS syndrome here.
What's different about DRESS?
DRESS is known for being notably late. It often doesn't appear until 2 to 8 weeks after starting a medication, which can make it incredibly tricky to diagnose.
Since not every rash is a catastrophe, how do doctors in a real-world setting quickly tell these things apart? We need to differentiate SJS-10 from its main lookalikes.
Okay, so for SJS-10, the key signs are that massive blistering and necrosis, the skin detachment we talked about. And crucially, you see significant mucous membrane involvement, the mouth, the eyes, the airway, plus a positive Nikolsky sign.
What's that?
That's where even gentle side pressure on the skin causes the top layer to just shear right off.
Oof. Okay, let's talk the two main differentials. First, erythema multiforme, EM.
Right. And it's important to know that EM is now considered a totally distinct disease. It's separate from the SJS spectrum.
How does it look different?
Clinically, EM had these very characteristic target lesions with 3 zones of color, like a bullseye.
Yeah.
You often see them on the palms and soles. But it just doesn't involve that life-threatening, full-thickness skin peeling.
And then there's DRESS, which sounds incredibly serious because it's systemic.
DRESS is extremely serious. You get a skin eruption and a high fever, yes. But the defining feature is profound internal organ involvement.
Oh, wow.
The liver's involved in over 80% of cases, but it also attacks the kidneys, lungs, heart. You also see blood abnormalities like high eosinophils, eosinophilia. DRESS has a very high mortality rate, sometimes up to 47%, depending on the organ damage.
So given all that complexity, how do you get the final confirmed diagnosis for SJSN?
Well, the history and physical exam are primary, but a skin biopsy is absolutely essential for confirmation. It'll show the classic subepidermal bullae and full-thickness necrosis, and clinicians will immediately calculate something called the Scorton score. It uses simple factors, age, heart rate, how much skin is detached, to quickly predict the patient's in-hospital mortality risk. It helps triage.
Let's switch to critical management. A patient comes in, you suspect a scar. What is the single most important immediate thing you do that saves lives?
I cannot overstate this. The immediate, definitive discontinuation of the offending medication. Full stop. Early withdrawal is consistently linked to reduced mortality. If you suspect it, you stop the drug.
And then the supportive care starts. You mentioned that they're often treated in a burn unit. Why that specific specialized environment?
Because a patient who's lost 30% or more of their skin has lost their entire protective barrier. It's just like a massive burn. They face huge immediate problems.
Like what?
Massive fluid and electrolyte loss. They can't regulate their body temperature, so they get hypothermic. And most critically, the risk of systemic infection is enormous because their primary defense is just gone.
That makes sense. So the care is meticulous. Fluids, high-calorie nutrition, special dressings. What about the skin itself?
It's all about meticulous, non-adhesive wound care. And unlike some burns, we actually tend to avoid debriding the blisters at first. That blistered skin can act as a sort of temporary biological dressing. And we don't use prophylactic antibiotics. We only use targeted ones if an infection is confirmed.
Okay, let's talk systemic treatments. The sources say older stuff like corticosteroids and IVG have, mixed evidence, high infection risks. But there is a treatment that goes right to the core mechanism we discussed, cyclosporine. Why is the data so compelling for that?
Cyclosporine is so promising because it directly interferes with the pathological pathways. It's a powerful immunosuppressant that inhibits T lymphocyte function. And crucially, it specifically acts on that apoptosis pathway.
The fast ligand signal.
Exactly. It downregulates the CD95 pathway, effectively blocking the fast ligand signal that tells the keratinocytes to self-destruct.
So it's a double whammy. It stops the T cells from going wild, and it blocks the death signal from reaching the skin cells. What do the results look like in patients?
They're powerful enough to be practice-changing. Studies have shown cyclosporine is associated with a significant mortality reduction. One study that compared it to IVG showed an incredible 43% fewer deaths in the cyclosporine group.
43%. That's a huge number in critical care.
It is. And while the evidence is still mostly retrospective, it's highly promising. We see reports of the disease progression just stopping within 12 hours and skin starting to regrow within 96 hours. That's why recent literature is more and more recommending it as a first-line therapy.
That really suggests we finally have a targeted weapon against this catastrophic self-destruction.
It really does. It shows that when we truly understand the molecular trigger, in this case the apoptosis pathway, we can design an intervention that changes the outcome.
So, to recap our deep dive, we've covered this entire spectrum, from the traditional happen model to the direct, dangerous bypass of the PI concept. We detailed the cellular breakdown driven by granulosin in the Facile pathway. And most importantly, we learned that targeted genetic screening and prompt therapeutic action, especially with cyclosporine, are fundamentally changing the prognosis for these patients.
I think for you, the listener, the 2 immediate takeaways are these. First, if you suspect any severe drug reaction, stopping the drug immediately is the single most important life-saving step. And second, remember the power of genetics. Knowing those HLA alleles like B58.01 for allopurinol is a critical piece of medical knowledge that can prevent a catastrophe before a single pill is even swallowed.
I want to leave you with one last provocative thought. The knowledge we've discussed today highlights this incredibly intricate, often unpredictable relationship between small molecule drugs and the massive machinery of our immune system. After all this research, why do these simple molecules, designed to heal, suddenly fit perfectly into the binding pocket of a specific T-cell receptor and trigger total cellular breakdown? It's a biological mystery where the cure becomes the disease, defined by a single receptor fit. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.